This is a re-review. I originally reviewed Forza Motorsport in 2020, but there were a few things that I didn't like in that review. And after recently playing more games released in 2005 and 2006, some of my views on this game have changed. So I changed a bit of the review and made the quality a little bit better. In 17 years, there have been 13 Forza games, including the Horizon spin-offs, and that one weird street racing game that nobody liked. Those 13 games span 4 console generations, selling over 16 million copies worldwide. But what is now a hyper-realistic driving game, or the only open-world racer currently in this generation, came from Microsoft's desire to make a Gran Turismo clone. The early to mid-2000s was an interesting time for the racing game genre. Every game developer that made a racing game that was slightly realistic were trying to copy Polyphony Digital with Gran Turismo. The 1997 original Gran Turismo was the first game of its kind, which then went on to become the best-selling game on the original PlayStation, with the second game becoming the third best-selling. So there were going to be quite a few copies of it, or games that were inspired by it. No one managed to make a racing game that had the car list, progression, or realism as Gran Turismo 1 and 2 on the PlayStation and Gran Turismo 3 A-Spec on the PlayStation 2. The original Xbox had many racing exclusives. A lot of them were from franchises taken from other platforms, such as Midtown Madness, which was only released on Windows, and Project Gotham Racing, which was a continuation of Metropolis Street Racer on the Dreamcast. None of those games were realistic. Sega GT 2002/Online kind of comes close, but the physics are a bit too arcadey. Microsoft Studios knew that they needed a realistic racing game that could compete with Gran Turismo, and established Turn 10 Studios in 2001. Turn 10 Studios only had a small team of 24 people working on the game, and even though they didn't have that many employees, they still managed to develop their first game in only 2.5 years. Forza Motorsport was announced in 2004, and after being delayed 3 times over the span of 5 or 6 months, it was finally released on the 3rd of May 2005 in North America, and 10 days later on the 13th in Europe. You start the game with 23,000 credits, and that is enough for you to get a reasonably fast car. But the region that you get your first car from will dictate what cars you're able to buy and when you're able to buy them for the rest of the game. I bought the Golf R32 as I wanted to have the game to be mainly focused on European cars from the beginning. But all of that went down the toilet when I realised that most of the cars that I bought in the first 10 hours of gameplay were Japanese. I'm personally not a fan of the direction the developers went in when it comes to unlocking cars, but I think a lot of people did, as it's the same in the second game. What I do like is how you progress through the game. All events past a certain point are unlocked by you getting through the levels, and you unlock the last event at level 50, which will take you quite a while. Like going through the point-to-point, amateur, professional, championship series and endurance events took over 50 hours. I think the way Turn 10 Studios did the progression system is better than how Polyphony Digital did it in Gran Turismo 3 and 4, where you have to get a few licenses to unlock events and complete the game. Forza Motorsport was supposed to drive Gran Turismo players away from the PlayStation 2, and so the developers would have been finding ways to improve on what Sony Computer Entertainment were offering at the time, which was Gran Turismo 3 A-Spec. Many Gran Turismo players don't like the license tests and think that they are a bit of a dumb way for someone to unlock events, but there are people who like the challenge. In a way, I agree with those who don't like the license tests, as for the most part, I also think that they are a bit of a dumb way of unlocking events. But I also like the challenge, and they do teach you how to drive. But Forza Motorsport isn't lacking that. The game uses the first few events to teach you how to drive and to get you used to the AI, and because of that, I do think the progression is better in Forza Motorsport. That goes for a few things in this game, including the already mentioned AI. The game has the smartest AI that I have seen in any game developed before 2007, except for Toka Race Driver 3, which was released only a few days before Forza Motorsport. The AI recognise you on the track and they change the way that they drive based on how you drive, which is what people do in real life. And sometimes they do make mistakes, such as occasionally driving off the track and hitting a tyre wall. Speaking of AI, we get to the drivatar system. This is where you train a driver to drive for you in races. First, you have to drive a bunch of cars around a few tracks. This will tell the game how you drive and try to recreate you as an AI. All of this is so you don't have to drive in races. I'm sure that when the developers were coming up with ideas for the game, this one was probably the idea that they thought would make the game sell, but in reality, it's not that good. And it is a little bit pointless. When you get everything set up and you're able to use it, then it's fine. But if you do choose to use the drivatar system, then the drivatar itself will take a bit of your winnings. So you may as well just do those races yourself, as you don't really gain anything from it. Even though I can't think of a good segue, I am going to talk about the tracks, which Forza Motorsport has 35 of, which are set in 17 environments. Just like in Gran Turismo, some of them are real, such as the Nürburgring in Laguna Seca, and some of them are made for the game, like Maple Valley and Alpine Ring. There's also point-to-point tracks set in shipyards, the Nürburgring, and a mountain in Japan called Fujimi Kaido. Then we have Blue Mountains Raceway, which is a mix of real and made for the game. Overall, the track looks like Mount Panorama, but there's small changes to the layout which took me a while to get used to. I think the reason why the developers made a fake Mount Panorama is because they probably couldn't get the licensing for the real one. I think it was probably an issue with the company that ran the track at the time, because every game that had the licensed track had something to do with V8 supercars. But a few years after Forza Motorsport's release, Mount Panorama started to appear in more games. As Rally is missing from the game completely, there are no dirt or snow tracks, which is a shame, and it's an issue that I have with the Forza Motorsport series as a whole, all the way up to the latest game, which is currently Forza Motorsport 7 as of writing this review. The tracks look alright, but tracks in Gran Turismo 3 and 4 have way more detail. That's not good, as the Xbox is slightly more powerful than the PlayStation 2, and Forza Motorsport was released somewhat 4 years after GT3. Some of the tracks like Silverstone and the Nürburgring look quite dull in terms of lighting. There are some that don't look dull, but then you can see how bad the quality really is. The Rio de Janeiro city circuit mainly comes to mind. The tracks are definitely one of the weak points of the game, but what isn't a weak point is the car list. Sort of. There are 231 cars for you to buy, win and collect. There's a lot of things that I like about the car list, but let's get the things that I don't like out of the way first. The car list is mainly made up of tuned cars, race cars and supercars. They could have cut the amount of tuned cars just a bit, as we don't need 2 variations of the Veilside Supra. I know that a lot of people like that the game has a lot of tuned cars, but it's a bit much when they make up a huge portion of the car list. There are also way too many race cars. I get that it's called Forza Motorsport, but some manufacturers which make good road cars have little to none in the game, such as BMW. Now, the case with BMW was apparently because it's hard to get licensing for BMW's road cars, but Games such as Gran Turismo 4, Enthusia Professional Racing, Need for Speed Most Wanted, and Project Gotham Racing 2 all have BMW road cars, and all those games were released at around the same time. Turn 10 Studios and Microsoft Studios did manage to get the licensing for Porsche, which at the time were only appearing in EA games, which does make the excuse for the lack of BMWs quite unbelievable. But I do wonder how much Microsoft Studios had to pay to get Porsches into the game. All of the cars look brilliant. They also have damage models as well, so you know that Turn 10 Studios put a lot of care and attention into the car modelling. Forza Motorsport also has car tuning and customization, and this is where the game really shines. You can upgrade the engine, suspension, brakes, do weight reduction, and a few other things that you could do in other racing games. But you can also do engine swaps and add body kits on a few of the cars. Something that other games of this type didn't have. This was the best upgrading system that I had ever seen when I played this game as a kid, and it is still better than some racing games released in the past decade. You can also create and add decals to cars to make amazing pieces of art or try to recreate race cars. I think the customization is better than that of most games made before 2006/2007, but I don't think it's better than the customization in Need for Speed Underground 2. But unlike Underground 2, you don't need to customize your car to progress through the game. Overall, the game is amazing, but the tracks could have looked a little bit better. The car list is good, but doesn't have the amount of road cars that a lot of people would have liked, and the customization is absolutely brilliant. There is no other game like it on the original Xbox, but I'm not going to recommend it, as most people who have an original Xbox most likely have an Xbox 360, which has Forza Motorsport 2, a game that is almost a 7th generation remaster with a little bit more content. And so I'd say Forza Motorsport 2 is the one to buy. This has been my review of Forza Motorsport on the original Xbox. It has been a year since my last video, and I want to say thank you to those of you who have stuck around waiting for me to get round to making this video. If you liked this review, then please give it a like. If you didn't, then that's your problem, and if you want to see more, then please consider subscribing. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.